Todd has taught at the College for Creative Studies in Detroit for the past 38 years. His work has been shown at the Robert Kidd Gallery in Birmingham, Michigan, and the Scarab Club in Detroit, among other venues. He has received numerous purchase awards and commissions from museums and private collectors. He holds a BA from Hope and an MFA from Cranbrook Academy of Arts. So if everybody would welcome Todd Erickson, we're so pleased to have you today.
Thank you, Susan. Wonderful introduction. I appreciate you and all the rest of the participants for your time today. If you're out and about the state, this summer I'm lucky enough I have a large piece on view at the Marshall Fredericks Museum, and that's in Saginaw. And I also have a piece on view at the Flint Museum of Arts in a figurative show. So can you all hear me pretty well? Yes, okay, great.
Yes, perfect.
So, I really have, as a great introduction, we have to talk about sculpting, casting, and install as three parts. And my father was a minister, in fact, grandfather and great-grandfather too. But Dad was a real stickler about brevity. And he felt that if you couldn't do a sermon and make 3 points within 15 minutes, then you were in the wrong business. So I went into teaching instead of preaching. So, which is lucky. I have students for quite a lot longer than 15 minutes. However, attention spans probably are 15 minutes. Nonetheless, we have to talk about these three parts, and it's very, very simple and very complicated all at the same time. So I try to explain it, but it's an abstract thing, and I hardly understand it unless I'm doing it. So bear with me, and we'll try to make it interesting, not too mechanical, but to show you how these things come to life. So I've got a quote to read to you from David Smith, one of my favorite sculptors, and he said in 1952, "Sculpture exists on its own. It is an entity. I want you to travel by perception the path I traveled in creating it." Now that's a tall order for him to think you can look at his sculpture and travel that path. Those of us who make artwork maybe can. But anyway, sculptors want people to understand their work and perceive it, but it's a bit preposterous to suspect that people can do that entirely. And hopefully they see things I never saw in it. So nonetheless, I want to talk to you about how we got to that point, how we traveled through that sculpture and made that thing. I think you've all seen it probably out in front of the museum there in Holland. And I was approached by a group from the college at a solo show I had. So I'm going to start my slides there, and you'll be able to see a picture of that show. Only important. Now, Susan, I'm trying to do this.
Yeah, I'm with you. Go ahead and click the green share screen.
Okay, here we go.
And then choose the icon that you're, yeah, there we go. Perfect.
And then we'll see if I can advance this. Oh yeah, never mind, I can. Okay, so this is a show and a contingency from Hope College, including Charles Mason and Billy Mayer, came to look at the show. And that card just shows two of my pieces. They're about 4.5, 5 feet tall, two pieces next to each other, to give you an idea of the work. And then the show looked like this on the inside of the gallery. Some wall pieces, some floor pieces, some tabletop or shelf pieces. And what these have in common is that they're all created plein air. They're created out of wood that's not from a lumber mill, but from the woods. Most of this wood is white cedar, the preferred wood for me to work in as a woodworker. So I can fashion these things in cedar fairly easily. And then I have to do an editing process to think very, very hard about what's going to be worth casting. Because, you might think they're all worth casting, but that's not really true. So here's another room full of those pieces. And they're inspired by nature, I guess, obviously. but they're inspired a lot by rivers in Michigan and northern rivers. And so you might see images of swirling and whirlpools and fish and branches. And I try to catalog those things as I'm hiking and canoeing and taking images in my mind. So here I am, that's me. I'm with a large piece called Platte River 2. And that was a pretty big piece to cast. I didn't cast it all at once. I cast it in 17 pieces and then weld those together. And I suppose the magic is in the metal working, the finishing, almost like jewelry work, so that you can't tell the sections from one another. So I'm pretty happy there. They saw me and they gave me a chance to make maquettes or models or sketches that could be considered for a large museum to put in front of, or for a large piece to be in front of the museum or somewhere near the museum. So I made quite a few maquettes. Hold on a second. They looked like this guy on the right-hand side of your screen. And those were sort of meant to be huge as I made them, but they're small. So that piece on the right-hand side of your screen has some gold leaf on the bottom on a piece of cast driftwood. And that was intended to be a bench where people would sit and maybe feel some kind of comfort or safety, or at least get off their feet. So I made a lot of maquettes like that, and I took them over to Holland, and they liked them all. And they said, well, see what you can come up with. And I knew it wouldn't be any one of those pieces exactly, but it'd be a bit of an amalgamation of those. So I went back to the studio, and then I thought to myself, I can't work in the studio just out of a vacuum. I have to go to Holland. And so I went to Holland, and that was a research phase to reacquaint myself with the campus and the new museum and the area. And I even went to the beach, because why wouldn't you? So I was, you know, I don't think you'd call it real research, but I was trying to become more acquainted again with the area and figure out what was super important about the area, you know. And obviously that's a lot of industries and some that are gone now. That's obviously a lot of college activity, all the commerce in Holland, tourism. And then I started thinking about what it used to be in the olden days, and you know, even before the sailboat makers got there and it was just fishing, and then before the, you know, the folks like us got there, what it was like. So I tried to be a little bit responsible to thinking about the area, and then kept on working. There's that museum with nothing in front of it. I wanted to be inspired by the museum, and I wanted my piece to work with the museum and with the college and with the campus. Here's another maquette I had. This is actually a piece in wood. It's called Legacy, a bit of a nod to my time at Hope College. That's a different maquette that I really liked a lot. It's kind of like a seated figure in itself, but it was going to be about 15 feet tall. And then this lovely bench area for students to sit. And this one, you can maybe see there's a symbol of the fish in there, ichthus, and more in the area on the bottom for sitting, seating. This piece is called Unity. So these have a lot in common with the piece that you see at Hope College, I think. This one may be the closest to it. Well, then I had to go up to Sheboygan to find wood. There's white cedar all over the country, all over the state, but I had a connection in Sheboygan, so I went up there, and it's very beautiful. And I was able to collect some white cedar from land he had. We didn't steal anything. We didn't take down anything that shouldn't be cut. But, oops, I was up there, and he had just finished making a wigwam. He's from that culture where they make wigwams, and they'd used all white cedar. So that was pretty neat to see this white cedar wigwam. And in the foreground, there's cedar poles. And those happen to be very straight poles. I was interested in curved white cedar, also known as arbor vitae or tree of life. So here I am. I got a trailer full of it. And it just looks like somebody who's, you know, got to go to the burn pit. But That was all carefully chosen, and I loved that wood, and I ended up using quite a bit of it. There's a pile of it off the trailer. So, I'm kind of getting used to the materials at this point and working with those pieces and those sections, those elements. So they're a whole pile of Lego blocks, and I got to make my piece out of that. I had a pretty good idea what to do, but of course it's an adventure. And that's where you can see me laying out things in the driveway and day after day changing it and flipping it and working. And it's pretty abstract to make something flat on the ground and then put it up in the air. Maybe it's akin to making a garment, like a dress or a coat. But I kept working away. And at some point I like certain features and I have to hold things together. So I can use wire and zip ties and screws. And once I can hold it together, then I can manipulate it, move it around, and start to put it up off the ground and get the elements going. And this is toward the end. This is pretty close to what it is now. So there's a big time lapse there of me working in the hot driveway. But get to that point, and here I am standing behind it. So it's propped up, and the studio behind me is full of stuff, but this piece all made outdoors in the driveway. Here I'm on a ladder, making sure it's all sturdy. And at this point, I've worked on the art quite a lot, but I also have to make sure that it's not going to tip over, that it's sturdy, and that it's going to be suitable to be a huge bronze casting that won't fall on anybody. So it was quite a bit of engineering in a sense to make that thing strong. Now, the trick was I had to take this whole thing apart and make sure I knew where everything went by measuring it and making marks. And I put it in my truck in pieces, took it over to Hope College, and I set it up. And there it is in wood on the hill. And Jack Nienhuis and his daughter are off to the right-hand side. And I think Charles Mason's got his arm in the air. At any rate, take it over there for final approval on that sculpture. So I went from the maquette stage to the sculpture stage, and this is where the final approval happened from the museum and the Nienhuises. Even the placement was pretty well figured out at that point. So we all liked it, and people looked at how it sat in the environment and how it looked in front of and behind buildings, and I think everything was considered. And then I took it apart, put it in the truck, and brought it back home to the studio. Here it is. It's pieces of it are laying out on top of a giant paper where I have to cartoon it or sketch around it to make sure I know that I can keep that shape after I cut it into pieces. So here it is cut into pieces. But the drawing had to be done carefully, and every single little bit of it's got a bunch of measurements on it to make sure that it goes back together correctly. Cut into pieces I can handle in the foundry. Pieces that once they're in bronze, I can actually lift them, and they're not too huge. Also for mold making, we cut it into smaller pieces. Now at this point, I often think about Greenfield Village and how they would move the Cotswold cottage from England, and each brick is precisely graphed out and cataloged. It's kind of like that. Hopefully I'm just as accurate as those architects were. Now the sections.
We may be having an internet issue. Todd, are you, I noticed that a while back you went off camera. Can you start your video?
Would, but they're definitely prepared for casting.
Todd,
yes.
could you go back just a few sentences? You cut out for a little bit, your internet just, so maybe go back 60 seconds.
Here or so?
I'm sorry?
About here?
Terry or somebody else, would you nod yes? Or go back more?
One slide forward at the beginning of that one.
Awesome.
Okay. So the large pieces were brought home from Hope College, and then they're laid out on the paper for a mapping or a cartooning of the actual shapes and contours. And all these heights, the elevations of the piece are written down too. And that's so that ultimately I can put it back together and have it be exactly as it was in wood, you know, minus a little bit of shrinkage. So here's, did I go the right way? Let me make sure. Yeah, this is
nodding.
This is the larger kind of oval shaped piece, but it's all cut up, so it looks disjointed. It's cut up into smaller pieces for casting, for the ease of casting, and also so they're not too heavy for a guy like me. These pieces got numbers on it, and there's lots and lots of measurements to make sure I can put it back together correctly. Then those individual pieces are shellacked and painted with an epoxy paint. So they're made pretty smooth for casting. And that will help me in the metal finishing in the end. And there won't be things that, pieces of bark that'll cut people's hands if they touch it. So it's smoothed out a bit from what it would actually be in nature. Okay, now we're going to get to the more complicated part, and it's difficult to see because you're looking down into a box, which is a mold box, and it's just a wooden box. You're looking at one white piece of a tree trunk, one white piece of a Ziibi. In fact, it's the spot where the name is on the piece. Pretty large section. I think it was almost a 500-pound casting. So what you're seeing is that tree trunk lying on its side, and it seems to be only half of a tree trunk because I put all this foam, green and white and pink foam, on the bottom of the mold box to bring up the elevation so that I'm just going to have one half of that wood showing. Because the wood is circular and I can't mold clear around it because I'm molding with a sand that gets hardened with an epoxy resin. So I'm going to put sand into there, and it's going to harden up, and it has to pull off of that wooden thing or the mold would break. So that's why the styrofoam makes it a certain level so that I get my seam line or my parting line on that piece I'm casting. And that's the principal trick to the whole casting process. If I can part these pieces correctly, then I'm home free. It's not always as easy as you think. Oops, went the wrong way. There's that very same piece, but it's 3/4 of the way molded now. So on the bottom was the section I was going to make and sand just after I showed you that first photograph. What I do is I mix up sand with this epoxy resin in a great big mixer called a muller. It's like a gigantic bread mixer. And we dump that onto the floor and then shovel it into the molds. So it makes up these really hard, almost like sandstone molds. Bottom section, the log is white in the center, and then there's another 1/4 of the mold behind it. It's done in these sections so I can pull it all off. This will make more sense as we go along. So there's the very top of the mold. I put the sand in, and it's screeded off, made smooth, and those clamps just hold it while it sets up. It's about a 35 to an hour setup time for the resin. Then they're super, super hard. Here's another example of the white log on the top, and then you're seeing both halves of a mold. The top half, the log sitting on, the bottom half's on the bench. Bottom half's got something yellow in it, and that's clay that I've put back into the impression made by that white log. So I had a hole or an impression made by that white log, and then I took the log out and I carefully put in clay. It's only about a 1/4 inch thick, all the way along that surface of the log. Well, this is a similar one, but different. And after I put that clay in, I was putting more sand into the center part of that cavity, which would be the core or the hollow part of the mold. And you can see that in this section, but it's really hard to see in my opinion. But the white log on top is what I molded. And then it's sitting on top of the top section of the mold. The bottom section of the mold is on the bench. And there's a pink sand in the center that's kind of log shaped. And there's a space around the edge. So the space around the edge of that is that 1/4 inch of clay that becomes stripped out after I make that. It goes away. So it leaves an airspace of about 1/4 inch. That's going to be very, very important because it fills with hot metal and becomes our log. So the log in most of these situations, when they're this big, are being cast hollow. And they'll be just a hollow version of the log, even though they're strong as a devil when they're hollow like that. So I don't know, this is super abstract. I don't understand unless I'm doing it, but here's another example of a mold that's a log that's buried in the sand. So it's halfway molded. And then I have to make the top 2 sections. So I put in a kind of a dam or a barrier, a shim out of a steel. And that allows me to make one side at a time with this sand. I know. So there you go. The shim's gone now. And then that sand hardened up behind it. And I pull that metal shim out and get ready to make the rest of the mold. It's just sort of one step on top of another. And you have to think your way through it as you go. There's another example of a mold box with a shim in the top. So I'll be able to make one side at a time of that in sand. And there's a mold all taken apart with the wooden log still in there. So I guess that's out of order. The end of the logs have this kind of bulb of clay on them. And that's going to be used later on to hold the core in place. It's an anchor for the core. Okay, there's a better example of a core. It's blue and the mother mold is pink, and there's a space all around it for the bronze to go. The knob on the left-hand side by the green, it's glued in there. That green knob holds that core in place. Otherwise, the core is floating around. So it literally has to be held in place. I don't think I show it, but underneath this core, this blue-shaped sand core that's painted blue, there's also little fragments of metal that hold it up so it can't shift around. They're called caplets. It's a lot of fun. So these cores that are created are these funny cylinders because they're the inside of the log. They're the hollow part of the log that we don't want to fill with metal because it's way too heavy and expensive. That blue paint is a alcohol-based core wash. So it makes the core smooth and strong. And I have to light them on fire to get rid of the alcohol, to burn the alcohol off. And it's actually quite a lot of fun for a pyro like myself. And I'll occasionally turn the lights off. So here I am, I was lighting things on fire and wearing my mask. This is how you look after you've worked with cores and molds, because you got sand and core paste and core wash and everything all over you. It's kind of messy. And then here's a bunch of finished molds. So we're jumping along, going through some months of process here. These finished molds are ready to pour. So they're in our pouring pit, and behind me to the right is an orange glow. That's my bronze melt furnace. And we have nearly 300 pounds of silicone bronze in there. And at that point, I can see by the temperature, it's not quite 2000, but we'll pull it out at about 2200 degrees. We end up pouring a lot of the molds at about 18,500 or 1900 degrees. The molds have square boxes on top of them. That's where the bronze goes in. So that's a cup. And then there's little holes to the right and left of those. That's where excess bronze comes back out. So that's a vent. And some of them have heavy kind of iron looking troughs on top of them. Those are our ingot molds where we pour excess bronze that we haven't used in the process, because you have to melt down more than you need or you get in deep, deep trouble. So those ingot molds are for the excess bronze. They also add weight to our molds because we're pouring a lot of hot metal into a mold, and it wants to, it has a great amount of pressure and it's expanded, so it wants to pop out. It's really a weird pressure thing, but we put weight on top of the molds to hold them together. We also have those bands on there with wedges to hold the molds tight. Because if it leaks, I lose the whole thing. And you can tell it's a lot of time to start over. So here, I'm sorry, but this is after the pour, just after the pour. I get pretty busy during the pour. I don't take any photographs. But this black kind of circular thing in the center of the picture is our crucible. And that actually held the hot molten metal I was talking about at around 2000 degrees. And it was poured into those big, big molds on the floor. And I think that was one of those pours where we had to have two of those crucibles ready, which is a trick in itself. So they're looking down on the mold after the pour. The pouring cups and the vents are all full. And there's a lot of weight on the mold, and most of that's just our bronze alloy. It's a silicone 9514 alloy. It's real pretty. That's adding extra weight. And I think I had a couple 100 pounds on top of that mold to hold it down, which, you know, is you have to instinctually do that. And I didn't get any leakers, so we did it right. There they are again, a lot of metal on top of them for weight, sand around the bottoms of them in case they do leak out. And we're pouring not sand molds, but some ceramic shells here, but I did want you to see the temperature of that metal. And it's pretty safe. If it hits you, it's no good, but that's why we're wearing leather and Kevlar. No more asbestos, but we wear a lot of protective equipment, and I've only been burned by the heat of the proximity of it, not by the hot metal itself, because I always wear the right gear. And we're pretty much careful about that at the college. You have to be. So the radiant heat that's coming off of my face, that's probably the most of it. You just feel that. And if you're not protected, it gives you a really bad sunburn or blistering. Now that's the big mold we showed you, one of the big molds, but well, no, it's not. It's actually the bronze casting hanging in the air above the mold. So you see a yellow strap at the top, maybe. That's around the pouring cup, and I've yanked the whole thing up with our crane, and it's hanging in the air there. A couple 100 pounds. I'm trying to bang the sand out of the core. It takes a while. And there's an aftermath. The broken up bits of the sand and some yellow straps caught in there. Anyway, that all goes to the dumpster, wheelbarrow by wheelbarrow. It's not the easy part of the process, but over 2,000 pounds of that went to the dumpster, little by little. So this is another process we go through. This was for smaller sections on Ziibi, and they were pieces that were around an inch or less in diameter. So it does not pay to make a sand mold with a core. The core would be too teeny weeny. And you're only talking about $1 or so of metal at that point. So these pieces are made differently. These are the wood sections, and they're dressed up with shellac and petroleum jelly, and they're on these cups, these pouring cups on the bottom. And then I'm going to coat those with ceramic shell. And that's a refractory product that's it's a liquid. It's a real thick liquid. And we dip those pieces of wood into that ceramic shell, sprinkle a refractory like a sand over that, and repeat the process 12 times. They dry in between. At about the 4th layer, I add this chicken wire, and I apply it and tightly bind it on there and wind it around. And that's in case I got a crack in the mold, it won't fall apart. The chicken wire will hold it in place. Because you see, all these pieces of wood were Ziibi and wood. I only have one chance at this. I have to do it absolutely right with no rookie errors. So now those finished ceramic shells that you saw there with the chicken wire on them, here they are with 12 layers of shell on them, and I put them in a really big incinerator, a big kiln, and have a few different sessions of burning away the cedar. And it's pretty easy to reduce the cedar to a black carbon, but then to get it to ash is even tougher. So there's a lot of tricks, but it's essentially, instead of losing the wax in a lost wax casting, I'm losing the wood in a lost cedar casting. There's those very same shells, ceramic shell molds, but the cedar's all gone from them. I actually blow them out and sometimes wash them out with water. So they're really clean. And then the bronze goes into them when they're dry. And I get a very, very exact facsimile of that log you saw a few moments ago, or that stick. Most of those about an inch diameter or less. There they are, the cooling. And this happens really fast, going from that white hot metal you saw a moment ago to this. Oh, I don't know, I walk across the room and take my coat off and take my mask off and wipe the sweat, and I turn around, they're like that. It happens very, very fast, which is an interesting thing about this metal. Here they are, they're a few days later, they're all cooled off, and the shell is broken off of them with hammers and chisels pretty carefully. And then I sandblast them, and except for the color, they look just like a pile of wood. they're really amazing. It's kind of fun at that point. On the ends, there's these little square pieces of what was wax originally. Those all have a code on them to tell me how it goes back together. And then I start putting it together. So those pieces of paper come out that I had in my driveway months before, and the pieces start getting put together little by little. Each piece is kind of tacked with the welder, so it's just got some pinpoint tacks to hold it in place, and then I can remeasure and look at it and calculate, and I don't proceed to the final welding until I know it's perfect and it's as close as I can get it to what I had in wood. And that's by measurements, photographs, and these cartoons, and then sometimes my memory, but I don't trust that entirely. Here's a picture of a seam being put together. So the seam is pretty wide at that point, maybe almost ½ inch wide. And the pieces are beveled off, or they're cut way down to the center of where the metal is. And then welds are put one on top of another. You end up with a solid piece of metal that way. So each weld is on top of the other, and they're very sincere. And I wish I'd shown a better weld. These aren't great, but I had some beautiful ones, of course, during the process. That gets filled up, and if you can, in your mind's eye, you see how the wood grain all runs together. So when I'm done, I've got about a ½ inch or 3/4 inch wide space that's been welded on, has to be ground and sanded and then filed. And it's not that hard. It's just got to look like all the rest of the metal and not look like a band where I welded it. So it's some jewelry work, I must say. Here it is again in parts and pieces, and I have to use a crane to move it around. Here's a bottom section. Looks funny, like a gun. This was one section I had a lot of trouble with getting back together exactly right, so I had to bring the wood back out because I'd saved all the pattern wood in case I had trouble. I don't know, I couldn't figure it out. It seemed like the whole thing was off about 1/8 of an inch, but I finally got it. So you see gloves and welding masks, and usually there's 2 grinders, one to take metal down to grind with, and the other one's got a very, very skinny blade where I can cut and actually take little slivers of metal off if I need to. There's 2 big sections of it all put together. I think this was maybe around New Year's I got that far with it. And you can see those bands, but when I'm all done, I hope you don't. You can see the bands where the sections are welded together and then ground down and finished, but the color's still kind of funny there. There's that big section, kind of the oval. And that was almost too tall for our crane. Now, I went outside after that because I had to start putting the whole thing together. So outside I had 3 different cranes, and that was a circus. I don't think OSHA likes people doing that, but I did it and nobody saw me. And this was great. It was a lot of May, June, and July outdoors assembling this thing. And you can't imagine how much fun that is. It's like a great big puzzle, and you get close to the end of the puzzle, it's more fun. Now this shows the bottom of one of the pieces on the left hand. Well, I guess you see a round hole there on the bottom. That's just been welded and bored so that when it sits like this, it can be on top of stainless steel rods. So the bottoms, everything that touches the ground had to be prepared like that. Here they go. 5 stainless steel rods went down below the piece. So in the piece itself, there are bronze nuts, and those are welded into the bronze structure. And then the stainless steel rods just go into that. So it's all very mechanical, and it's super duper strong. Now I got the piece standing upright again, and it's changed colors because I've done all the metal finishing I can do, which I didn't show you, but it's just so much sanding and sanding and sanding and polishing and reworking of the grain with chisels and files. And anyway, I get to a point where I'm done, as done as I can be, and I start to do this process here called patination. And I'm adding ammonia and vinegar and salts, sometimes some Miracle Grow, all kinds of funny things I can do to make that metal corrode and make it look old rather instantly. well, instantly as in over about 10, well, 14 days. But it's layer by layer, and then I rinse in between the layers, and sometimes it rains on it. And so it's a bit of a natural process, but mostly it's me applying these salts and chemicals in order to corrode that metal, oxidize it. And that's a lot of fun. Here you can see it's sitting on top of some steel. And at that point, I built a steel carriage for it out of channel steel. And then that was all drilled and tapped, so I could actually bolt the piece down to that steel. And then there's these eye hooks in the steel, the eyes you see on the floor there. They were able to be there for the crane to help lift it up. So the thing was solidified on the steel kind of rack. Ziibi was made really, really very, very solid, because I knew it had to come out of this pit behind the College for Creative Studies and go up into the air, over some fences, and then onto a truck. This is a final application. I was waxing and adding some gold leaf. These two elements that are probably the less natural looking elements in the whole piece, but they were there in life, but they're very parallel sticks, like some kind of, maybe a nod to the architecture in the area. Those were gold leafed. I don't think the gold leaf is prominent now. Here's the name, Ziibi Elpidos, right, 2017. And that's getting final wax on it so that it'll stay like that for a while, but we know it'll change because bronze is that kind of metal, but it looks almost like that today. And it goes up in the air. And this was Allstate Rigging Company, Joe Novak. I know his wife went to Hope, but anyways, he might have too. They're right down the street from Hope. Great company. They came clear over and they hoisted this guy, Ziibi, this fella came right out of that pit, way up in the air, and like that, and it was spinning around. It was really pretty cool to see. And that's the college behind it, and then the foundries on the main floor there. So Joe Novak and his crew put that on a truck, a flatbed, and then they said, we'll see you in Holland. And I said, no, I'll just drive behind you. But they had to go back roads because of its height, so they couldn't go the highways. And anyway, I just decided to meet them the next morning. So they drove the back roads, and then they stored it at their lot just right down the street from the museum. And then this is early the next morning, as you can see from the sunshine or lack of. And they got their truck out of the lot with their crane and with Ziibi, and off to the museum it went. It was really cool. They're super hardworking, great people. In fact, I would trust a crane operator with anything. There it is. It's hovering over the site and kind of getting ready to be positioned. At that point, we had the piers, cement piers were in the ground, and then these stainless steel rods had to be added onto the sculpture at this point because it was in the air and it had been on the truck. So we got the stainless steel rods into it, and then they had to be positioned over these concrete footings, which had about 1.5 inch holes drilled in them. And the stainless steel rods are 1 inch. And then these guys came with a really neat epoxy product, squirted it into each hole, and then the sculpture was dropped onto the cement footings with the stainless steel rods sliding into each one of the holes pretty easily. And then we waited 30 minutes for the epoxy to set up, and it was like that. This is maybe an hour later. So it's very, very secure. You could pull it out of there with a large crane or probably a bulldozer, but it would take something very, very big. Footings go down 48 inches. So it's pretty secure. And that's just the right way to do things. So there's another side view of it, or I'm sorry, back view of the piece. Front view. And the grass is just growing in nicely around it. It's all kind of beautiful how that's worked out. There it is, a sunset shot. Now I'm gonna take one moment and read to you a small thing I wrote, a little bit of creative writing, because I think these sculptures are hard to talk about and hard to explain. So maybe the creative writing fills in a bit of the gaps for us. Ziibi Elpidos, Ojibwe and Greek for river of hope, a river of tradition, a river of wisdom and learning, a river that is a tributary to the world, a river that flows compassion, faith, and community, a river that swells in memory and percolates into destiny, a river that teemed long before sails and steeples, a river that circulated through old growth forests, a river that mingled with fish and game, a river that carried the first people, a river that must not forget, despair, or abandon. Ziibi Elpidos is our river of hope, a current of God's continuity, balance, bounty, and grace. Spera and Deo. And here's Billy Mayer's class sitting on it. And here are some children playing on it. So all of that intended and kind of hitting the mark where I wanted it to. It's a museum, so it doesn't get probably as many college kids as you'd think hanging around on it, but I'm giving it time. And here I am at the brewery after the whole thing was over, being happy and proud of myself. So I hope that wasn't too long, but I had to explain the situation and how that was made. Do you have any questions at this point?
I have a question, Todd.
Yes, sir.
What technique do you use for welding? Do you arc weld or do you use acetylene gas welding?
I do all those things, but this piece was 100% TIG welded.
Okay.
All TIG welded, yeah, and with a bronze alloy, the very same bronze alloy, but pretty fun. I was able to use 1/8" sticks, so the welds laid in very, very fast. But you can't imagine what buying 50 pounds of those would cost you. Yeah, but a lot of fun. Yeah, the TIG welding was great. I went through quite a few cylinders of gas.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I have a question in the chat from Terry. How long in months from concept approval to delivery? Any estimate of total hours invested?
It was under 2 years, and the hours are hard to calculate, but I will put it this way. Every morning before work, I would go in there and work till about 8:30, and then I tried to get every lunch break and some evenings, and certainly every single weekend, I had to ignore my family and be in the foundry. And when I really got a lot of work done were the breaks, the school breaks, when no one was around to kind of slow me up. So I don't know. It's hundreds and hundreds of hours, but I can't tell you exactly. It's just a way of life for a while.
Thank you. Terry also asked, how does one become this type of artist?
I think it's just experience and time. You can take some classes in college, but then you have to keep doing more and more and more of it to learn about casting. And every project's a new challenge, it seems like. And I teach the casting too, so I should be pretty good at it. But I don't know. It's always a challenge, and people bring things in that I've never seen cast, and we try to do our best. So it's experience and time. You can learn a little bit in a college course, but yeah, I think it's mostly just learned in the foundry. And it's one thing on top of another. I started with very, very small sticks, and then I've gone on to these huge logs. So it's a progressive set of skills one has to build.
Mm-hmm. I have one additional, and I wanted to point out that you're still not on camera. I don't know if that is by design because of the internet connection, but if you can find your controls, if you do want to start sharing your video, we'd love to see you as well, or just holding a beer.
Let's see here. I'm just trying
You
to think. Can I stop sharing?
Yeah, now I can do what I did last time and kind of unshare your screen. So everybody be patient because we do have a couple other questions in the chat. So
Okay, good.
in order for me to have you stop share your screen without I'm gonna have to, well, I'm just gonna share my screen and you're gonna see a quick email, and now I'm gonna close that out. And now we can see you. So we have two more questions in the chat right now. The Bakers asked, just curious, seeing the base, the concrete tie downs and the crane, what was the approximate weight?
I think very, very close to 2,000 pounds of bronze. But then there's an additional 100 or so of stainless steel. Other than that, it's all bronze. So yeah, about 2,000 pounds, which doesn't seem like much considering how big it is. But that's where the hollow comes in and being frugal.
Mm-hmm. And Jack says, thanks a lot, Todd, for a fine presentation. We continue to enjoy Ziibi Olpidos as we pass it while driving by on the street or while walking to the entrance of the Krusengar Art Museum. Lee and I are very pleased with your sculpture.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you, Jack.
That echoes a lot of our sentiments. Now, that's all I have in chat. So I'll open it up to the floor. Be sure to unmute.
Did I mute myself, Susan?
You are unmuted now. So yeah, if somebody else wants to talk or ask a question, be sure to unmute yourself.
I'll just kick in at this point. I'm Terry here. I think there's a concept sometimes that the artist is very esoteric, which they are, a lot of conceptual and so on, but just the presentation reminds me that a lot of it is working. It's working with your hands, it's working with metal, it's welding and so on. So I'd love to see more folks that see themselves as workmen also use their imagination and create things such as this. It's not so much of a divide as I maybe had thought before.
I'm glad for your comment. I guess maybe a little bit related to that was what I went through when I was building it, and being at the College for Creative Studies, I'm around a lot of these automotive designers, and the majority of my friends kept saying, "You're an idiot. You got to digitize it. You get that thing digitized and send it off to a foundry. They'll make it for you." And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to do it myself. I wanted to be the hands of the sculptor. I wanted to be the hands of the foundryman. And I wanted to be the artist and make the thing from scratch. So a funny thing was I got way down to the end of it and decided how I was going to sign it. And I had all this computer stuff figured out, how I was going to like etch this plate and make this rapid prototype wax and then cast it. And it would have my name and the title and all be very fancy. And my friend, who's a blacksmith said, "This is ridiculous. You've come all this way with your hands. Why would you go anywhere else now?" So I signed it by hand, which you can tell looks kind of funny, but it just, engraved by hand. And so I kept the process very, very old fashioned and handmade by the artist, start to finish, with a lot of credit to God for growing the cedar.
Well, the piece means more because I know that that's the way you did it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thanks. I'm glad to be able to share with you, and it's not just some guy putting sticks together in a studio. It does hopefully has a little more meaning and depth than that. Because otherwise I wouldn't spend the time on it. If it was just a design, I wouldn't spend the time on it. I wouldn't care. But when it meant something to me, then away I went. And I'm still attached to it. It's like my kid who went to college and never came home. He keeps changing majors, you know that phenomenon? I guess it's healthy. I don't know. Susan, am I being heard?
You are, and it's a little hard because we don't want to talk over. I normally don't comment during a class, but I would say that your creative writing piece was also very impactful in helping to understand, because I will echo the comments of, it's not just a creative process, it's a very technical process, but then to understand the emotional process and the meaning behind it is very special. And I think helps us all appreciate the art so much more profoundly.
Well, thank you. It's always a danger of being contrived, but you try to be honest to the subject and give it some of your own perspective. And I don't know, I've always loved Hope College in Holland, Michigan. And for me, it was a joy to be able to reflect on that and make something that maybe commented about the whole community and the history in a very abstract way, but I believe it does.
If you'll allow me to make a pitch here, if you want to read that poem and see more of the information about the sculpture itself, you can find it in Hope College at 150, of which I was the lead author and editor, published by Benraldi Press in 2019. It's on pages 480 and 481 of the book, volume 1.
It's beautifully written. It's a great book, Jack.
Thank you.
I'm lucky to be in it.
Well, I would just like to say, this is Peggy Purdy. I would just like to say thank you for giving me an opportunity to know the actual artist of that piece, and that it will always mean more to me when I go to that museum. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. It does help to know the artist. It really does. It's too bad it's like that, but when we read art, we think about the person sometimes.
I just have another thank you in the chat from the Bakers. It's a beautiful sculpture. Does anybody else want to unmute themselves and maybe talk about the meaning or any other commentary? We'd be wrapping a little bit early if I close the class, which is, there's nothing wrong with that because we've covered a lot of ground, but Todd, are there any final thoughts you'd like to share?
Yeah, I would like to thank all of you for your time. The time is very valuable, but the other thing, if you're by there, pat that piece for me, maybe sit on it, put your foot up on it, tell them to pick a major, hurry up with it. You can be as stern as you want, but that would be nice. Thank you.
Oh, you're going to have a whole team of people doing this.
Good. They can all sit on it. I prepared the piece to be strong enough for 15 football players to play on it. And I don't think any football players have yet.
I'm going to pass that along. The baker said they'll definitely stop by and give it a pat. So with that, with all of us agreeing that we'll go show the sculpture some love and give it a pat, we'll give you a either virtual or real round of applause and sincere thank you for taking the time to meet with us, to educate us, to inspire us to see things a little bit differently. And we just appreciate it and have a wonderful afternoon.
My pleasure. Thank you, Susan.
Okay, it was nice meeting you. Okay, all, have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.